Welcome to another real-time watercolor tutorial. In this month's video, we are painting a loose wreath of asters and I'm showing you every single step. Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Hello there, welcome back. My name is Shayda and today we're doing something a little different. We're going to do a real-time watercolor tutorial and paint this wreath of asters. So this is something that's been requested a little bit more lately and I'm trying to deliver even though it is a different video format. So quickly we'll run through our supplies. I am working on hot pressed watercolor paper. It's got a really smooth surface that I love. It's 9 by 12, 140 pounds, so you can see all that info there. But if you prefer cold pressed or rough paper, those are different surfaces, you know, it doesn't really matter. Just use the watercolor paper that you love. And then I have my Muño 48 pan set. I love this set of paints and it's a good quality for price. And then I'll probably do the whole wreath with this number 3 pointed round brush. It's Kolinsky Sable Hair. And remember, I have a blog now where I link all my products. You can shop the entire product list. So head over there after the video. And then we're using 2 glasses of clean water and paper towel for blotting. So we're going to start, we're just going to jump right in because this will be a longer video and we're going to mix up some yellows for the asters. I don't tend to use these lemony yellows. Instead, I choose the kind of ochre tones that you see on the left of the palette. So I'll start with the darkest one there. I just get my brush wet and then I scrub at that cake of paint, get it nice and wet and bring the pigment over to my palette. So you can see then on the palette, I can add more water to that paint, or I can pick up a different color like brown. Same thing with a clean wet brush, scrub at the brown and bring some pigment over to the palette where you can mix up your colors. You're certainly welcome to use the colors right out of the pans. I know I got a few questions about that in prior videos, but for me, it's just part of the art is mixing up my own colors. And that's always up to you as the artist, how far you want to go with your mixing. You can use the paints right out of the tube or right out of the pan. And here you can see me just kind of mixing up another lighter yellow ochre color. And I'm kind of playing around with these 3 yellows and adding a bit of brown and adding water. So I'll wash my brush in the water that I'm using for lighter colors. Then I'll pick up some clean water and I am going to grab some blue. But first of all, whenever I get a set of paints, I always do a little color chart because it can be hard to see the actual color in the pan because it's so concentrated. So I want to use that blue right there, that really bright one. It's just going to give me a nice bright blue from which to mix. I actually don't want to use a bright blue for the painting, but it'll be a good mix when I start mixing in the purple and the gray and I'll get this beautiful periwinkle. So clean water, I've put the blue on the palette. Then using this clean water, I am going to add a little bit of purple and that's what you see me doing there. I'll go back for some more blue because what I want to do is mix up a periwinkle. This set doesn't really have that color. So I'll mix in a little bit of white as well. Again, clean wet brush and I'm just scrubbing at the cake of paint, which is very hollowed out because I use a lot of white. And I'm going to add a bit of blue to that. And, I'm just really playing around and kind of trying to figure out what color is going to look good. And I'm also going to test out the colors on a little bit of scrap paper so that I know I'm happy with them before I even start painting. And just a reminder that every Friday when the video comes out, we also give bonus content on my Patreon site. It will be a worksheet, a coloring page, and this week it's a September calendar printable made from this wreath. If you would like to support the channel, head over to Patreon and get yourself some bonus content. Okay, so I've mixed up some nice periwinkles by mixing purple, blue, and French gray together. With a clean wet brush, I'm going to scrub this pan of aqua paint right down here in the bottom. You can tell it's a color I don't use very often. Just mixing in a little extra water with that. But I love to make a periwinkle that is a mix of purple, aqua, and either white or light gray. That always gives a really nice periwinkle color, and it's a sort of a mix that I go back to again and again whenever I want this particular color. I'm mixing in a little bit of French gray, and maybe I'll mix in a little bit of that bright blue as well. You know, having a large palette is so great because you can play around with your colors and just test out different things and try different things. The last thing I want to do is mix up some green. So I have this really warm green, and I think seeing the color chart there on the left, you're able to kind of look at what color I'm choosing from the palette. So with a clean wet brush, I'm scrubbing at that warm green pan, and then this really dark green. If the palette was a little closer, you'd probably be able to see quite well that that green is really hollowed out. There we go. It's because I use it all the time. It's a cool green, it's dark, it's just sort of my perfect green. So I am adding a bit of water to that and bringing it over to the palette. And then one thing I like to do with my greens is add a little bit of brown to them. I just find that helps to make them look a little more natural. So let's grab a piece of scrap paper. And what I want to do is simply with a clean brush, I'm going to test out all the colors that I've mixed. So I really like the way that ochre looks. If I mix just a bit more water in, we get this really, really light yellow. We can look at the way the dark color bleeds out into a wash. And so I'm happy with that. That looks really nice. And I can see I've got a good variance of color there as well, from dark to lighter tones. For the green, I have that really nice warm green that I mixed a little brown with. That looks good. And then I have the darker green that I also mixed a little brown with. And I think that looks nice too. And that gives me kind of two colors of green with which to do the leaves, and that'll give me some nice contrast within the piece. Now the periwinkle, I'm going to bring that over here. Right away that looks like very bright, very purple. You know I love my muted colors, so we're probably going to change that up a bit. I'll continue to test the other colors from the palette. This one has more French gray in it, so I like the kind of chalky, sort of muted look of that. And I think what I want to do is just mix a little more French gray into the periwinkle so that it gets even more muted and a little darker. See, that to me is going to make a nicer painting, or a painting that's more in my style. So just testing your colors ahead of time is such a good idea. And then for that brighter, darker periwinkle that I first tested, what I'm doing here is I have a navy blue and I'm mixing a little navy in to darken it just slightly. And again, that's just going to give me a color that kind of more speaks to my style. I'm mixing in a little more blue, a little more water, kind of playing around. Scrap paper is so good for this. If you mess up a painting, keep it and use it as scrap for testing your colors another time, because testing out the colors ahead of time is, to me, it's the biggest step in creating the entire painting, is mixing your colors and then trying them out and making sure you like how they look together. So that is done. Let's put that aside and we can actually begin our painting. You're like, okay, finally we're getting to the painting step. One last thing, I'm going to sketch out a pencil circle or an oval. My tip here is don't make it too big. Like, don't go right to the edges of the paper with your circle. Keep it tight. It will make a much nicer wreath. And then once I've done the pencil, I kind of erase it a bit so it's not too heavy on the page and I can begin my painting. Okay, if you made it this far into the video and we haven't even started painting yet, I have a reward for you. We are doing another giveaway. If you would like to win a set of 12 Muñoz watercolor paints, all you have to do is subscribe to this channel, turn your notifications on, and comment below letting me know your favorite wildflower. And with that done, I think it's about time we put paint to paper. So I have a clean, wet brush here, and I am picking up some of the yellow paint. And we're going to start with the little stamens. We're going to do this really loose, simple wreath. A wreath is a great way to just get painting because you have your circle there and you can just follow it and you don't have to overthink it. You don't have to think too much about composition. So all I'm doing is making some circles that are made up of dots of paint. Some are more like ovals. There we go. We've started with 3. Let's clean our brush. And actually, I just need to get rid of some of this pencil. I always do this. I forget to erase the pencil where I'm going to work. So I'm going to carefully get rid of it. And then we are going to continue painting. If you paint over pencil, you're not going to be able to get rid of it. And you may always see it because of the transparent nature of the paint. So with a little bit of that light periwinkle on my brush, I am just going to start creating these messy little aster flowers. You know, they're great for painting because they should look very perfectly imperfect. They have these long, thin, tightly clustered petals, and we just want to kind of give the idea of that burst of little blue or purple petals. We'll get in nice and close so you can see. And I am just kind of, just adding a little bit of periwinkle paint to the page. I sometimes let the blue touch the yellow in the center so it will bleed a bit. And in other areas, I kind of keep back a little so that I don't get that yellow mucked up too much. But I'm just using the very tip of that pointed brown brush, and we're going around and just doing these messy clusters of petals. You can see in some areas you see one single petal, and then in others it's just a burst of lines, and they all kind of bleed together and blend together, and I like that a lot. Okay, continuing on, I've got a little bit of that ochre color on the tip of my brush, and you can see I just make a little circle or oval that's made up of tiny little dots. And I forgot to erase again because that's how I roll. So I'm carefully erasing the pencil and carefully kind of brushing it out of the way. Yes, even with my pinky there. There we go. Now I've got a little bit of that blue. I'm just going to call it blue because periwinkle is such a long word. I've got a little blue on my brush, and you can see I just I'll either pull the brush towards me or kind of push it away from me in order to do these really thin, delicate little brush strokes. And the nice thing is that every brush stroke should be a little different. The petals should not all match. If it does, it's going to look weird and unnatural because it's too perfect. So kind of cluster some of the lines, make some of them thin, make some of them thick. This one is a good example. You can see how different each area of petals really is. And I'm going to pause here for just a moment to thank Squarespace for sponsoring our video today. I love mentioning Squarespace to you because I know so many of you are accomplished artists, but taking that jump into the online world and online sales can be a little scary, but Squarespace makes it super easy. You can select your template. I always say that's the fun step. Here's what I did with my template. I just input my own photos, changed up a few colors. I liked the graphic, simple to read fonts. And then the best part is that they have these portfolios and galleries. So creating a gallery of your work is really simple. They have automatic image scaling. They have easy importing. You can take images from your Instagram, from any of your social media, and it just is all super simple. If you do run into trouble, they have 24/7 email support so you can get sorted and really sell your work online. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Shayda Campbell to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Okay, getting back at it here, we're going to start this process again. So I'm picking up some of the ochre and I am painting a couple stamens. This is a really fun and simple way to paint a wreath, is to kind of work your way around slowly, just painting small clusters of flowers. And so I've painted 2 stamens. Now with a clean brush, I'll pick up a little bit of that periwinkle and I am going to finish those 2 flowers. And then I just work my way around the wreath like that, making sure that I like the spacing and the sizing of the flowers, because some of the flowers I'm going to make a little smaller and some a little larger, and some are touching and clustered and some are all on their own. So in that way, I think the process of creating this loose aster's wreath is really simple. And yeah, we're really just using the tip of that paintbrush to do those little petals. And I'm going to also paint some flowers that are on an angle, or it's like you're viewing them from the side, so you're not seeing the center of the flower, and that will also help with the contrast of size and shape. And I had a little bit of a darker periwinkle on my brush, so I added some to that one flower, but you know what? We're gonna come back to that later. We're gonna add all the shading in later. So I'm painting a couple more stamens. I tend to do maybe 2 to 4 every time as I move my way around the wreath. And with those done, I just grab a little more periwinkle on my brush. And we continue to add the petals. Sometimes I am making sure that the petals are equal in size all the way around the stamen. Other times I'll make the petals at the bottom or the front of the flower really shallow, and that helps. I talk about this in so many videos, but that helps with the look of the flower being concave or just sort of, being on a bit of an angle. I know you can't see my palette right now. I wanted you to have a nice close-up of the flowers, but I have so many different areas of blue or periwinkle. I've got areas where I've got a really dark periwinkle, and that other section of the palette where I've mixed up a lighter periwinkle. So that's really helpful when you're painting. You can grab from different areas, and you can see those two flowers. One is really light, one is a bit darker. Even within one flower, I'll grab from 2 different shades of the blue, and that just gives me a nice natural look, an organic look. Speaking of the dark periwinkle, I am grabbing a little bit of that, and I am going to paint some smaller asters that are on an angle, so we're not seeing the stamen in the center. We're just kind of getting this almost triangular burst of petals, and I'll paint a few of those. It's a good tip to keep your flowers clustered. You don't want one flower here and then 2 inches over another flower. I think they look most natural and pretty, and it's this beautiful burst of flowers when they're all kind of touching a little bit and they're closely spaced. And then I have the green sitting on the palette, so I decided to start, just maybe putting in a few leaves. And you can see between the flowers, I just do these little stems to almost make it look like it's a flower crown or something, like everything is joined. So I just do these really thin lines, kind of joining the flowers. And then I drag that brush across the page in order to make these little leaf shapes. And I just use the very tip of the brush to do the stems and the branches. And then I add just a hint more pressure in order to form those long, thin leaves. And I'll just keep kind of going around, and you just want to make sure that you're kind of framing the flowers with these leaves. They're very thin and delicate. You might sort of tuck a little shape of a leaf in behind a flower. And then same thing with the leaves as the flowers. I've got a dark cool green and a lighter warmer green, so I can pull from either green when I want to paint a leaf, and that's a nice way to create that organic look and a little bit of contrast. So you can see I've got a little bit of the darker cool green on my brush, and I'm just adding a few more stems and a few more leaves. Yeah, and I will always want to do some little leaves kind of trailing away from that central wreath as well, and that gives a really loose and pretty look that I think just looks really nice. But yeah, I'm just kind of going around and kind of stepping back and looking, where do I need another leaf? But I love painting wreaths because you just kind of keep going around and around and adding more flowers and more leaves until you're happy with the overall look. So it's a very chilled out process, and probably in a second here I'm going to go back and finish up with the flowers, but I kind of just wanted to give you and myself a chance to see what the wreath is going to look like when we do start adding these leaves. And I think the colors are working together well, and the leaves are framing the flowers really nicely. And also adding the leaves, I can see that my spacing is looking good, so I'm happy with the way that the flowers are spaced, and I'm kind of feeling confident now, like, okay, now I can continue on with the rest of the flowers. So adding some more little yellow stamens. You can, I'm kind of just like, where should I put one? Here, there, I don't know. Yeah, this time I actually remembered to erase some of that pencil, so that's good. I've learned. I'm almost done the wreath, but I've finally remembered to do that. So with a clean brush, I am adding some little purple or blue or periwinkle. Oh my gosh, this color is just tripping me up. Some little blue petals and keeping them a little bit messy. Some of them just look like a big burst and you really can't see individual petals, and that's okay. And some of them are really light and some of them are a little darker. And if the wreath is looking like a little bit washed out to you right now, I totally agree. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a lot more contrast, and we'll do that using a wet on dry technique. So we'll wait for everything to dry and then we'll add our darker contrasting, like a nice rich dark blue and a rich dark green. But as I paint these flowers, I am using what's called a wet into wet or a wet on wet technique. So the paint is still wet. It's just what it sounds like, using wet paint on wet paint. And when both colors, or when my paint is wet, that's when I get that beautiful bleeding and blending of color. And you can see on these flowers, just if I let the blue sort of just gently touch that ochre color in the center, I'll get a nice little blend. And if I decide to add a slightly darker shade of periwinkle or blue, it'll blend and bleed into the petals really nicely. So right now we're working a little wet into wet, just a little. And then to really develop some contrast later, we will use a wet on dry technique to add some more dramatic shading. I'm going to continue on, keep going around my little pencil circle here, adding flowers that are on an angle, adding some tinier flowers. And some of these little ones are just a couple lines, a couple strokes of the brush. They're super loose and messy. And that's the whole fun of painting loose florals, is that you don't need to paint a flower exactly to paint a flower. Just make a little messy burst of petals and call it a flower. You know, that's the charm of watercolor. Okay, I'm just going to keep working my way around this circle here if you're not too bored of my painting yet. You remember to erase the pencil. This is a very important step. Yeah, we're filming and I was like, I got to try to paint a little bit fast because I don't want this video to be too long. Chris is like, don't do that. Do not paint fast, please. We're just going to end up doing it over. And that is good advice. There is no rush when you're painting. Sometimes with a piece that is really important to me, I'm working on it for, a couple Saturday afternoons in a row. Other stuff like this where it's just a wreath, really honestly, you're going to see this in real time. So it took me about 35 minutes, I think, to paint. So not a huge amount of time, but a wreath really is simple because you're not thinking overly much about composition. But basically what I'm saying in a really long-winded way is just don't rush. Take your time and enjoy the process of painting. Think about color, think about the brush strokes, and just, give yourself a chance to really get into it and enjoy it. And if you do the prep work, if you think about the color palette and test your colors and mix your colors ahead of time, I promise you it's not going to be as scary to put paint to paper. And if you're starting on your creative journey and you're looking for more content like this, remember I put out a video every Tuesday and Friday, so turn on your notifications and make sure to subscribe. Okay, the flowers are now all in place, and because I don't like to do anything in a linear fashion, I am going to add a little bit of dark blue to some of them. But not all of them, no. Then I'm going to jump around and I'm going to continue on with my green leaves. So I'm just washing my brush here and I'm picking up some of that warm, lighter green, and we're going to, drag that brush across the page in order to form these thin, delicate leaf shapes. And you can always refine your leaf using the tip of the brush. So if you want to add a bit more of a point to the leaf shape that you've just made, just use that very fine pointed round brush, just the very tip of it, it, and you'll be able to, you know, add a delicate point to your leaves or change up the shape or just refine the leaf that you've just painted. So I'm going around, I'm adding a lot of stems as well as leaves. I want these little thin lines to kind of join all the flowers together. As I said, it's kind of like a flower crown on a page. Everything should look like it's flowing, and one flower kind of joins up with the next with the leaves and the stems. So I am just carefully and slowly moving my way around, adding different shapes of leaves, different sizes of leaves. And you'll notice that this is something I always run into when I paint wreaths. Most everything at this point is flowing in a counterclockwise direction. Everything is kind of moving around the circle in the same way. But eventually I will switch that, because I think a wreath just looks more organic when the leaves are sort of going every which way. So eventually I'll turn this upside down, just because I like to paint in the direction that's most natural for me, and that often means flipping the page. And when I do that, I will switch up the direction of the leaves, and then by the time it's done, I should have leaves that are kind of pointing all over the place. And that just helps the wreath not look too stiff. So now at this point, I want to start painting the other side of the wreath. So I flipped it upside down. And instead of the leaves all going towards the left-hand side, some of these leaves are going to start kind of pointing towards the right, and we're going to get a much more organic look, I think. And if you watch the video about how to draw a wreath, I did the same thing, where it's not all flowing in one direction. We're mixing it up. We're getting crazy. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm still just pulling from each of the greens. Some leaves are dark, some leaves are light, some are a little warmer, some are a little cooler. That's giving me a nice contrast on the page, and it helps the whole piece to look a little more alive, I think. What I'm going to do now is just work my way around the wreath and add leaves and stems wherever I feel like I need one. If you're doing this at home along with me, remember, just, add a little extra pressure to your brush. If you're having trouble controlling the paint, if you're like, how come she can get it thin and then thick and then thin again? It's probably a case of just having a little too much paint in your brush. So don't forget to blot your brush on that paper towel or on a sponge when you need to. It's so much of control is just having the right amount of paint in that paintbrush. Just work your way around. It's a leaf. If you say it's a leaf, just make these random shapes and take your time with it. Okay, at this point we've filled in a lot of leaves. The wreath is looking good. It's looking fairly balanced. I keep going back and adding one more here and one more here. But at this point I really do want to get into the wet on dry and add the extra or the darker blue. So I am mixing a little bit of navy and a little bit more blue and dark purple and kind of creating just a really nice rich dark periwinkle. I want it to be really dark, really dramatic. In fact, if I show you the navy on the palette, you can see just kind of how dark it is. And that's what I'm mixing in. So I've got this really rich color now. And I want there to be a heavy contrast here. I think the wreath looks a little washed out, and that is okay. That tends to happen with watercolors. They always look, I find, at least I'm not using professional paints because I don't want to, alienate people by using super expensive supplies. So sometimes that happens. The paints just look a little bit flat, and that's when we need to kind of come in here and add that darker color and really create the contrast that's going to make the piece. So you can see I've got this really, really dark blue, and I'm adding it just at random to these asters, and that helps them look like they are more three-dimensional. It helps them look more realistic, and it helps the painting to not look sort of flat and dull. So, start with lighter colors and then build into these darker shades, and don't be afraid to get a little weird with it. There's no rhyme or reason to the blue that I'm adding. Sometimes I'm putting the darker color right around the stamen. Sometimes I'm adding like just a little bit on one side of the petals. Sometimes I'm adding it all the way around to all of the petals. I just want it to be weird. I want it to be random, just like it would be in nature. So just adding this darker contrast, sometimes going back over an area twice to get it even darker, sometimes just adding a few dots of paint, a few lines, a little messy brush stroke here and there. And this is really what is going to bring this wreath to life, because we're going to do the same thing with the yellow and the same thing with the green. And by the time we're done, nobody is going to be worried about a flat painting. With the blue pretty much done, I'm doing the same thing with the green. I've mixed in a little bit of that navy actually and just darkened it, and I mixed in a little bit of brown as well, but it was all the same mixing that we did before. I just needed a bit more green, and you can see I'm just adding, like, again, very random, just a splotch of green here or there. It doesn't matter if I mess up the shape of the leaf, I'm just, kind of put a little bit of green there, put a little bit here, and I'm using the very tip of my brush, kind of darkening some of the stems as well. But my basic formula is normally adding a little bit of that darker color at the base of the leaf. And you can see I've done that to a bunch. I'm not doing it to every single leaf. That will look too uniform. Just adding the darker color to some of them, and it really, I think now you can see how this piece is coming together, and it's not going to look flat, and it's not going to look too pastel, even though we did use that kind of baby periwinkle color. It's going to have some real dimension and contrast, and the flowers, because of the contrast, are now looking very organic, I think, as well. I have one flower up top here that does not have a stamen, so I am just adding, like, same dotting of a little bit of brown or ochre, and then I am taking a more concentrated paint. It's that yellow ochre with the brown, but it just doesn't have a ton of water in it. And just using the very tip of my brush, I am just adding some dotting. So much of this is just little dots, little lines, little, pulls of the brush, a little extra pressure. So much of watercolor painting is just all about the brush strokes. And with my palette in the corner here, you can see that the ochre paint, the water has evaporated. It's very dry, and that's helping me to get a darker brown here. So as your paint sort of dries a little on the palette, sometimes you can, achieve a darker color without even mixing anything new. And I'm just adding those dots of darker brown. And I think at this point you can see the contrast is really coming through. I get so many questions about paints that look washed out. And that can have to do with the quality of the paints and just getting started and not knowing how much water to mix in. But a great remedy for that, no matter the cause, is to do this wet on dry. So paint your painting. Sounds funny, paint your painting, and then, let it dry, and then mix up these really dark colors. Mix up a really dark green that has black or brown or navy in it. Mix up a dark brown, or if you're doing a pink flower, mix up almost a red, and then start adding in that darker contrast on top, and the whole painting will just come to life. At this point, I'm kind of stepping back from my painting and I'm looking at the wreath as a whole and just kind of trying to see, do I need another flower somewhere? You can see me painting that tiny little aster there in the top right corner. If you're trying to achieve balance, this is a tip I give all the time. Look at your painting in a mirror or view it upside down. That will help your brain that's kind of been staring at this painting for the last hour or two see the painting from a new perspective, and a part of the painting that's not so symmetrical will sort of become obvious all of a sudden. So it's just good to view it from a new perspective. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is kind of step back, look for where do I need a little more movement. I'm adding in these tiny, almost vine-like leaves. I'm picking up a little more light periwinkle and just adding I'm making like what I would call hints of flowers. Like they're just little brush strokes. I'm hinting at a flower kind of being in behind the other ones. I'm hinting at the idea of a little bloom that you can't quite see. So just adding, basically, it's just my way of saying I'm adding a bunch of messy brush strokes. And I just keep going around and around. Where do I need another leaf? Where do I need another little vine? Where do I need another little flower? I mean, at this point, I'm like, Shayda, stop. Can you please stop painting? Stop. Like, pull your brush away and put it down. But I just keep going back and adding one more little line is gonna, make it. One more little leaf, little branch. And this is like how I always finish a painting, like, please stop. And at this point, I actually am done. It has a certain balance, but it does not have perfect symmetry. We started with very light colors, but we've achieved a beautiful contrast with that wet on dry. And yeah, that's it. That's my Aster's Wreath. Patrons of the channel can print this. I made a little September calendar page for you. So head over to Patreon and support the channel and get a ton of bonus content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with a new tutorial.